Hello everybody and welcome back to Environmental Science 101. Here we have Unit 2, Section 3, Problem Concepts and the Environment, maybe not the most clear name. This particular section is going to get kind of abstract, conceptual, more brainy. To be clear, right, this stuff in this section is not immediately right now what we're going to need. But we're going to introduce these concepts, we're going to learn them, and then we're going to forget them, and then we're going to learn them again. And no joke, this is supported empirically, it's legit. That will help everything to stick. You will learn it deeper overall, right? So, doesn't mean it's not important. It is. It's critically important, incredibly important, powerful stuff. But it means that maybe I don't expect you watching this video to totally be on board with all this now, and that's okay. Maybe focus on the other sections for right now. Okay. I have this here, conflict of interest, right? So root concept. Some individual, right, has conflicting incentives, something you see throughout the world. I put this, ultimately because we want to try to move away as best we can from some of the moralizing that surrounds environmental issues in general, right? Not forever, but for now, we're going to look at behavior as a result of incentives, not necessarily labeling people as good or bad or moral or immoral. For now. We have three parts to this section. So we have this idea of the tragedy of the commons, negative externalities, and survivorship bias, which, to be clear, are borrowed from the social science part of this. Yeah. So first is the tragedy of the commons. So it is economics. I had learned it in an economics setting and reviewed it in government setting. So we have these things called rival goods, right, to start, right? So goods are things that are either products or services that people want, right? So things like food, cars, flowers. I heard about it as pizza and haircuts, right? So some goods are rival goods. It means that one person using it takes it away from another person, right? So pizza is an example, right? One person eats a slice, now there's only 7 left for everybody else. That's a rival good. Cars, food included, yeah. So you go buy a car off the lot, now there's one less. Not every good is like this. We could also talk about some goods being excludable, right? So it is excludable if you can force somebody out if they don't pay. So some things you can exclude people, some you can't. What can you not exclude people from? Well, a good example would be things like public parks. Oxygen is on here, which I guess is fine as the public good. Streetlights, libraries, knowledge would be good examples of this, right? So we can kind of line up our little chart here, right? So this is all the stuff that is rival. So one person using it impacts another. And this is the stuff that is excludable here. And we can kind of look, okay, so private goods are rival and excludable. Cars, flowers, you can stop somebody from getting it if they don't pay. And one person using it means there's less for others. You could have non-rival but excludable goods. Yeah, so the movie theaters, right? Unless everything is sold out, one person going to the movies is not going to prevent another person from going. Yeah, cable TV, I guess you could put software. This was probably made before software was all that common. I don't know, but yeah. Software is a good example, right? So one person goes and downloads a movie. Doesn't mean that other people can't. Same for a program, video game, whatever it might be. You could have non-rival, non-excludable goods, which we talked about. And then finally, we have this common goods, right? So this is where our tragedy of the commons comes in. It's non-excludable, right? So you cannot stop somebody from using it if they don't pay, but it is a rival good. So one person using it affects another, right? So fisheries would be sort of classic example, but forests would work as well, right? There are some examples that get a little bit complicated here, right? So like roads, right? So one person driving on a road doesn't necessarily impact another person directly, but at the same time, if you have enough people driving on it, it will break the road down. So as far as a focusing example, right? We have all this explanation. It is a collective action problem, right? But we can ground this with an example. And I highly recommend, so I think it's at the bottom here, yeah. So there's a TED-Ed video that explains this. It is wonderful, highly recommend, go watch it. If any part of this is unclear, like if you didn't know what this was already, go watch it. So we can consider the pond with fish, right? And this should be plural, right? So we got all the villagers coming up to take fish out of the pond. And they start to realize something. So each of them has the individual incentive to take as many fish as they can get. That's what's good for them, is to have more food, right? But if everybody does that, then all of a sudden there's no fish left, and since the fish are reproducing, right, the number of fish is a function of how many fish were there before. If everybody goes and does that, then there's no fish left for anybody. So even though each person has this individual incentive to take fish out, if each individual person follows that incentive and takes out as many fish as they can, then all of them are harmed, right? In other words, being selfish doesn't necessarily help that individual person, but they have the incentive to do so. And so this is how it becomes a collective action problem. The entire group of villagers who are pulling fish out of this thing have to come together and sign a contract or agree somehow as far as what can happen. So by acting collectively, they can wind up in a system where everybody gets more fish. Not for the sake of, being nice or good necessarily, but to result in more stuff for everybody, right? And this is a nice phrase to remember. So what's good for all of us is good for each of us, right? So acting collectively in a way that benefits the pond and everybody also helps the individual villagers. We have this concept of negative externalities, right? So we have some sort of transaction, could be any kind of transaction, and as part of that transaction, there is a cost that is not paid by the buyer and not paid by the seller either. So pollution is sort of the quintessential example of something like this, right? So, I'm buying some product from these folks and these folks are selling it to me, right? But there's also all this stuff, smoke and what have you, it's launched into the air that's bad for the environment, right? And so who pays the cost as a result of the pollution? Everybody, not the people who are involved in the transaction or who are making money off the transaction. So we have a private profit and a cost that is paid by everybody, right? Is what a negative externality is. I put an example here of pollution, but another one that we can talk about is littering. So for a while, it was a service learning event, the Adopt a Road, where I would go out with students and we'd pick up trash and recycling by the side of the road. And sometimes, I hate to say it, but I sort of felt like I was telling them that Santa Claus wasn't real when I told them that really the question of why would somebody litter is the wrong question. Real question is, why would somebody not litter? Because littering is in that individual person's best interest, right? So this is a negative externality, right? So we've got this transaction between me, I'm buying a candy bar, and the gas station is selling it, right? And then I take the wrapper and I throw it away. Who pays the cost to clean up that wrapper? Well, it might not be me or the people who sold it, right? It could be somebody else. It's the entire city. So this is how we want to view a lot of these, right? Behavior is about incentives. The question is not why would they litter, but why would they not litter? And there's some good reasons behind that for a later date. Okay, so our final sort of foundational concept here is going to be survivorship bias, right? And the related concept of silent evidence. This can get complicated in a hurry, but I promise it is worth it. If you are not familiar with this concept already, it is 1,000% worth it to learn what I'm talking about. Okay. So yeah, example that I always think of. So you can imagine young student who's, business-minded, right? And they have this idea, right, that they're going to go around and they're going to interview the CEOs of 10 really, really successful companies and write down all the stuff that those CEOs do. And then by the end of it, right, they'll have this really great list of things that you should do if you want to become the CEO of a great company. What is the problem with this? Problem is, you can go and interview 10 winners, right, in the business world, people whose businesses were really, really successful in all the things that they do. But what if you went and interviewed people whose businesses failed and you found that they did the exact same things as the winners, like it was the exact same list? Okay, then it tells you that whatever that list wasn't really the reason for their success. In other words, you didn't actually find anything out because you only looked at the ones who survived, right? The businesses who won, not the ones who lost. And that is survivorship bias. It comes up in many different forms. It is tough to recognize in our actual lives sometimes, but it's incredibly important. So the sort of timeless example of survivorship bias. So you are working in the military and your job is to help fortify planes that are being shot down by the enemy, right? And they come back, and you start to collect data on, the planes that return where they were shot to try to get an idea, right, of what you're working with so that you can make them safer. And you notice that the planes that come back, right, are shot at these areas where you have the red dots here. And then the question is, where should you put the armor on the plane? It's a plane, it has to fly. You can't load up the entire thing. It has to stay as lightweight as absolutely possible, right? So you want to add as little armor as absolutely possible. So you could propose putting armor on these areas with the red dots. And I think intuitively, the vast majority of people would do this, especially if they aren't familiar with this idea. But that does not work, right? The place that you want to put the armor is right here, right? Why? What's this telling you is that the planes that were shot here did not make it back, right? So that's where you want to put the armor. By only considering the survivors, you wind up with exactly the wrong result. That is survivorship bias, once again. And we can also think of prevention in general as not being salient, right? You can imagine, asking somebody to drive really safe, right? And then as a result of them driving safe, they don't get into an accident. Are they going to thank you for that? Probably not. Did you still prevent something really bad? Yeah. This idea of prevention not being as salient, right? It doesn't come to mind. It doesn't grab our attention the way that, letting bad things happen and then intervening comes up a lot. And prevention and precaution are extremely relevant to what we talk about in environmental science. I wanted to include this also, so I suppose this is related to survivorship bias and also to other related ideas, but we've got a collection of people who are gambling here, right? And different colors represent different people, right? So it says state, but we can think about this as like money, right? So higher here means more money, lower here means less money. And this is time, right? Maybe in weeks, maybe in months, it doesn't really matter, right? So we're moving forward in time as we go to the right. And we can kind of track them, right? So we can, track this gold person, right? And this gold person is doing well, right? Again, they're just gambling, right? Maybe they're going to the casino. Maybe, it's some other form of gambling that doesn't necessarily look like gambling, right? But it's completely random, and yet this person got lucky, right? So this person in gold, winds up with a lot more money than where they started. But not everybody does that, right? So we can talk about this person who is, I guess it's teal, you would call it, right? Who has this streak of bad luck, a little bit of bad luck here, some good luck at first, right? And then goes all the way down to this thing. So it's called an absorbing barrier. That is the kind of technical term for it. This is, bankruptcy here. And we can ask a couple questions, right, just looking at this. So the first, if this continued long enough, right, if you could keep going on the timeline further and further and further and further for a long time, what would happen to every single one of these people? They would all go bankrupt, right? Sooner or later, they would all go bankrupt. They would hit the absorbing barrier. Once you go bankrupt, then you don't have any money anymore. You don't get to gamble anymore. So you hit this thing and you're out. You're done forever, right? We could also think about, how different these lines look, right? Despite the fact that they employ the same strategy. In fact, maybe this could even be a little bit better than a 50-50 gamble, right? This could even be a favorable bet, and yet, with enough time, they will still go broke. How does this relate to our concept of survivorship bias? Well, these people who hit the absorbing barrier are removed from the system. So, does everybody in the world understand this? No. Do they know how to apply it? Applying it in real life is really hard, right? But what would we do? We would take this person in gold and give them a promotion and say, these people are in the middle, they have some work to do, and these people are really bad, despite the fact that it was all random in the first place. Okay, so real quick here. We will do this in much more detail in a unit on biodiversity, which comes not too far into the course. But I just wanted to put this here to illustrate this idea of survivorship bias, right, and global wildlife loss. So loss of biodiversity, loss of wildlife is really bad. And if we apply the survivorship bias concept, we kind of realize that because we cannot evaluate what is lost and you don't know what is lost, it puts you in a really bad position. Okay. Now for the final part. So that covers our foundational concepts. For the next part, we do an ecology and evolution crash course. It'll be fun. See you then.